Professor Manu Bhagwan.
Thank you so much, Gita, for that moving tribute. And thank you so much, Dr. Ramanathan, for that kind introduction and for your work more broadly and for being here today. I am so very grateful to Gita Sehgal for all that she has done for me for this book, for her remarks in absentia. And while she is unable to be here in person this evening, her spirit and the radical courage and fierce determination that animates it clearly fills this hall. This evening has been made possible thanks to the tireless efforts of so many, some of whom are here with us this evening. Ruchira Gupta, Te Bhagwan, and Gita Sehgal have worked wonders to put all of this together, and I thank them. I also thank the IIC for hosting, and to all of the center's support staff, sanitation workers, and security crew for looking after all of us. I'd also like to express my thanks now to Manjari Mehta, and particularly to Nonika Sehgal. Dear friends, old and new, thank you for coming. I'm honored to be speaking today about the pioneering life of a remarkable woman, or rather, in the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, the most remarkable woman, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. Her reach, I have discovered, extends far and wide, finding its way even here into this very room, touching each of us. Many of you in attendance might have known her personally, of course, but also the India International Center was itself designed by Joseph Stein, who came to India facilitated by the architect Richard Muerta, and none other than Mrs. Pandit herself. Stein's family have written to say how it was especially fitting, they feel, that she be honored here tonight in one of his buildings. They said, what goes around comes around. Is based on my new biography. 8 years in the making, based on research in over 40 archives from 7 countries across continents, using material in 5 languages. It has been a labor of love, and I am pleased to now have the opportunity to tell the story of this iconic Indian in full for the first time. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit was born in 1900 and lived until 1990. A long life that stretched from her involvement with the subcontinent's struggle for freedom to her career as independent India's perhaps most recognizable face abroad. Her story is therefore intricately intertwined with that of her country. And through it, we also tell the story of India and the world in the 20th century. She was born into an aristocratic family and grew up in Downton Abbey-esque surroundings. Her upstairs-downstairs run home in the city of Allahabad called Anand Bhavan, the abode of happiness. Sarup Nehru, her name as given at birth, was the daughter of a powerful, gregarious, and extremely wealthy lawyer named Motilal, the middle of 3 children. She was always closest to her elder brother, Jawaharlal. Nan, as she was commonly known, was a precocious child who was schooled formally by private tutors only up to an intermediate level. But her real education stemmed from her love of reading, facilitated by Anand Bhavan's magnificent library, and through her intellectually stimulating environment. Luminaries of all kinds filtered in and out of the house, and she herself began international travel from the age of 5. The family grew close to Mohandas Gandhi soon after his return to India from South Africa in 1914. And through the bond they developed, grew ever more involved in politics. While Nan found such matters interesting, the early years of her life were devoted to family affairs and to romance. This caused a fair amount of heartburn, and she was steered into more traditional choices by her relatives. She married at the age of 20 and changed her name to Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, taking her husband Ranjit's acronym for her own. Association with Gandhi dramatically altered her family's lifestyle. Jewels, silks, delicately woven tapestries, the finest china, all gave way to rough, hand-woven clothes and social upliftment work, especially for those from marginalized caste communities. By 1930, she entered prison for the first of 3 times, and through that fiery experience emerged tempered and steely, ready to do battle. A truly extraordinary, indeed cinematic, life followed as she became one of the world's most celebrated women of the 20th century, one of the world's most recognized and respected diplomats. Several moments from throughout her life really stand out. When she was still but a small child, she and the rest of her family were accorded a special honor by King George and Queen Mary. Later, when she was touring Europe for the first time, she was picked up by the police for the attempted assassination of Mussolini. Back in India, as tensions mounted, she faced down angry, violent mobs, forcing them to disperse, merely with the force of her personality and the power of her words. In the late 1930s, she not only found herself in Czechoslovakia during the Sudeten crisis, but also squarely in the middle of things, with Lord Runciman staying right next to her. Shortly thereafter, she stood outside 10 Downing Street as Chamberlain declared peace for our time. As you said, a personality that appears everywhere throughout the 20th century, or as I like to say, the Forrest Gump of the 20th century. In India, she battled famine and disease, even to the point of personal collapse. She served as a key intellectual founding force of the United Nations, and later was instrumental to the resolution of the Korean War. She became so beloved and so famous that ordinary folks like taxi drivers in the United States sang her praises. Even the incorrigible Winston Churchill was won over in the end. She worked with the likes of Bertrand Russell and Robert Oppenheimer to prevent nuclear disaster. And back in the United States, she told President Kennedy, "Don't go to Dallas." And then, she resisted, fought against, and helped defeat her own niece, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, to end her authoritarian emergency and restore democracy. Eloquent, glamorous, brilliant. She was the first woman cabinet minister in India, the second in the British Empire after Margaret Bonfield, and the first to wield substantial power in matters of self-government and public health. She was elected the president of the All India Women's Conference, where she tried to push it from elite concerns to more people-oriented ones. And from there, a host of breakthrough positions. Member of the Constituent Assembly of India, India's first ambassador to the United Nations, India's first ambassador to Moscow, the first woman ambassador to the United States, the first woman president of the UN General Assembly, additional appointments to Mexico, Ireland, and Spain, member of India's Parliament, High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Governor of Maharashtra, representative to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. An extraordinary life. But this synopsis should not give the impression of hagiography. While her career was remarkable, she faced many challenges, had many ups and downs, and did not always make the right decision. All as befits someone charting a new course. She battled depression, fatigue, and several breakdowns, sometimes publicly, sometimes privately. She was loving, but had a sometimes rocky relationship with members of her own family, like her sister Betty and her sister-in-law Kamala. And while she was lauded for her prowess in the West, she was nonetheless eventually iced out as her brother's closest counsel and confidant on international matters by her long-standing rival and nemesis, V.K. Krishnamenon. My work attempts to present Vijay Lakshmi Pandit in all her complexity, balancing a focus on her professional struggles and achievements with concern for her personal trials and triumphs. It is in the fullness of this picture where we can see her affection, courage, and talent, sharpened by ambition and temper, that we can better understand what it was for this pioneering woman of substance to sometimes be dismissed for being all wit and charm. We can see more clearly what it meant for someone who lost all access to her wealth when she was widowed to sometimes be criticized for her expensive tastes. And through such insights, we can better appreciate her contributions, not only to India and its foreign policy, but to the making of the post-war world itself. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit possessed a cosmopolitan outlook from early in her life, and it informed all that she did, gradually evolving into a distinct internationalist vision she spent her life trying to make reality. To illustrate this, I turn now to a series of readings from my new book, 4 episodes in total. The first of these takes place in the late 1930s and involves her election to the UP state legislature. This is now the reading. In late 1936, about a year after her election to the municipal board, Nan was selected along with Ranjit to run for a seat in the state legislature, now made possible by the Government of India Act of 1935. While she was enjoying her work at the local level, she could not resist the challenge the new position presented. Difficulties, opposition, criticism, these things are meant to be overcome, and there is special joy in facing them and coming out on top. It is only when there is nothing but praise that life loses its charm, and I begin to wonder what I should do about it, she recalled about 2 years later. She was about to get her wish. Nan was slated to run in the Kanpur-Bilaspur women's constituency, facing off against Lady Srivastava, whose husband worked in the Viceroy's Council. Like most others opposing the Congress candidates, Lady Srivastava was a powerful elite who generally was pro-British, or at least accommodational, and backed by money. While Nan herself did not lack for money or clout, Congress candidates, by and large, were underdogs, easily outspent by their rivals. To compensate, they had to engage in granular politicking, to spend time with individuals and communities they were hoping to represent. Nan's constituency was a rural one and very spread out. Standing for this election was altogether different from her previous experience, where she was able to contest from the comfort of her own home. Now she had to plan extensive travel, with days away from Anand Bhavan. Accompanied by several male colleagues, Nan set out by a Ford car, which had seen better days. Nan's first night on the trail was spent in a little village. After dining with the locals, she was escorted to her bed, which was laid out in a tidy school right next to those of her companions. This shocked her, since she was wearing a coarse cotton khadi sari and usually slept in something much more comfortable. But there was nowhere private to change. With nothing for it, she laid down and fell right to sleep. The next morning was hardly better. She discovered she had to bathe with one's clothes on in the traditional open-air manner of the Indian peasant. Again, the thick khadi got in her way, and she felt the task of cleansing herself this way difficult. But Nan was determined to make the best of things and to adjust as necessary, her experience in prison having prepared her for life beyond the comforts with which she had grown up. She came to love life on the road and the people she met along the way. She instantly connected with each of them in a personal way. That night she spoke with Ranjit by telephone. His constituency was Allahabad itself, so he remained at home with Jawaharlal. When she told him that she had slept with the boys, since she had no other place, he roared with laughter at his wife's predicament. While Nan, Ranjit, and other candidates concentrated on their specific races, Jawaharlal, now known widely simply as Nehru, traversed the country encouraging people to vote. He called on them to treat a trip to the polls as a pilgrimage and to resist temptations offered by those hoping to shore up the existing system. He declared, "We go to the legislatures not to cooperate with the apparatus of British imperialism, but to combat the act and seek to end it, and to resist in every way British imperialism in its attempt to strengthen its hold on India and its exploitation of the Indian people." The competition was fierce, the Times of India noting unusually large numbers of candidates in the field. Very few incumbents were returned unopposed, but Sir J.P. Srivastava, the husband of Nan's opponent, was among them. In late December, an objection was raised to Nan's candidacy in the hopes of derailing her chances, but nothing came of it. Voting stretched out over the first 2 months of 1937. Polling day in the United Provinces where the constituencies of Nan and Ranjit were located, was slated for February the 8th. As predicted, the opposition candidates, that is, those representing to our use of American slang, picked up through their time at the American Woodstock School in Missouri, Mummy had obviously thought, yeah, would be the most apt way to announce her victory to us, and the telegraph office had, of course, changed the word, thinking it was a mistake. We dropped our forks and joined in a wild dance around the dining table. Nan herself swelled with pride in what she personally had accomplished to a degree, but more so for her country and for its people. Alas, for us and for India, she reminisced regretfully decades later, we keep forgetting them, the ordinary people, letting them down when personal opportunity beckons us, running to them when their aid can tip the political scales in our favor. In every crisis in India, the faceless multitude has rallied to uphold the great ideals on which our civilization has been based. But in the continuing crises in their lives, what have we done, the so-called leaders, the educated, the upper classes? This next excerpt takes place in the United States in early 1945. She is about to embark on a speaking tour of the country and meets with a leading talent agency to discuss the parameters of her appearances. Episode 2. Nan sat down with Clark Getz in late January. He and the Walshes were in regular touch and had been informally discussing possible tour arrangements. The need for a formal speakers bureau to handle her itinerary had grown increasingly apparent in the short time that Nan had been in the country, as invitations and inquiries seemed to follow each of their various engagements. After her evening with the regional Indian community in early January had produced the finest reports and a lot of positive behind-the-scenes publicity, representatives of the League of Nations had even reached out to Walsh to ask if she would speak in Toronto. This had been regretted as she did not have permission to travel to Canada. Getz had a sterling reputation and his agency had represented many prominent speakers. His interest in Nan was testament to the drawing power he believed she had. Even so, he had allowed his vivid imagination to get the better of him. He started to inquire about what kinds of colorful saris she intended to wear and asked where she was keeping her jewels. Americans, he told her, channeling P.T. Barnum, would expect to be dazzled by the exotic. Please understand, Nan would later recall, she told him, that my husband has recently died under tragic circumstances. My brother and the leaders of our freedom movement are all in jail. I have been able to come to this country almost as a refugee to tell people the truth about India. The story of what is happening must be told, and it is so dramatic that it needs no props. I do assure you that I am a good speaker. I can reach my audience. They won't bother about my clothes or the absence of jewels. Please let me do this my way. She had one further stipulation. She would not speak in any forum that excluded African Americans. There would be 6 potential topics: what kind of post-war world, the 4 freedoms for Asia, democratic guarantees of peace, the hope for world betterment, why India wants independence, and the coming of Indian democracy. Getz put together a 1-page promotional release, which featured a headshot of Nan in a dark sari, looking askance. That's the picture on the cover of my book. This pundit's influence is felt not only throughout India, but throughout the world, and her strength will be felt even more widely in the post-war years. Devoted to the general betterment of mankind, along with the improvement of political and social conditions in her own country, Mrs. Pandit is an ardent advocate of democracy. She feels that only democratic institutions and complete freedom of thought and expression can win the peace and successfully manage the problems that will follow the war. And that freedom in the truest sense, is the only security against the recurrence of the present catastrophe. This third excerpt takes place at the top of 1947, just months before India's independence. But here, the angle is quite different. The focus is on the response to her debate at the United Nations, where she had just won a resounding victory in response to South Africa's discriminatory domestic laws and defeating the renowned Jan Smuts in debate. Episode 3. The American black press and race justice activists savored the defeat dealt to white supremacy. The New York Amsterdam News wondered on its front page how South Africa would save themselves from isolation in one world, now that they had been handed such a humiliating setback. The paper noted that all comers, even the deceptive and hypocritical Sir Hartley Shawcross, brackets here, one of the most distinguished judicial minds in the world at the time, who had just been the lead prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. Sir Hartley Shawcross and Charles Fahey, parentheses, the American Solicitor General. Even the deceptive and hypocritical Sir Hartley Shawcross and Charles Fahey were no match for the brilliant and silver-tongued oratory of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. The paper called the victory won for our side in an editorial, evocatively writing that racial Jim Crow had been blasted as out of line. They celebrated the stand that the diminutive and charming Indian delegate, who they noted had broadly identified herself with the struggle of all colored peoples against discrimination, had taken against the full battery of American arrogance, English chicanery, and their boot-licking stooges. It now remains for us, they wrote, and for all who believe in one world, to work that first step out to its fuller conclusion of justice for all men everywhere. The Atlanta Daily World headlined a front-page story. Madam Pandit leads fight for minorities, and noted that she was also urging Negro unity for independence. They ended with an observation and a plea. Mahatma Gandhi's admonition for his countrymen that freedom is not a cheap commodity may wisely be shared with the American Negro. Rise up, O men of fortune. Writing in the Chicago Defender, W.E.B. Du Bois, the leading black intellectual of his day, declared that, quote, every Negro organization in the United States ought to send an official note of thanks to Madam Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, adding that she should be known to all persons of African descent as the leader of the successful assault upon the color line. He observed that she had not confined her attack to the Indian problem. Rather, she repeatedly spoke of the situation of the natives and the disabilities under which they labor. He praised her for her unselfish and courageous attitude, and wrote that he hoped that it would spur solidarity and a more united front against racial injustice everywhere moving forward. The final excerpt takes place in 1941, prior to the last two readings. I've situated it here to allow Vijay Lakshmi Pandit herself to have the last word. Episode 4. The 16th session of the All India Women's Conference, the leading national women-led advocacy organization at the time, was held in late December 1941 in the southern coastal city of Kakinada. In entering the name of her cousin-in-law as president for the coming year, Rameshwari Nehru began the meeting by highlighting Nan's signature achievements to date, heralding her as the most popular minister in her province. She is well known for her tact, for her discrimination, for her grasp of things, and for her ability to work with all kinds of people and in all kinds of situations. She knows how to tackle difficult problems, and in her dexterous hands, they become easy of solution. It is her capacity for hard work which has given her the position in public life of the country which she holds today, she said in praise. Other opening remarks were just as laudatory, if not more so. Margaret Cousins declared that Nan's presidency crowned with success all that Cousins had fought and stood for over the past decades. A princess from a small local zamindari state, Yuvrani Vevati of Pitapuram, then in the same capacity that Nan previously had, formally welcomed all the delegates to the conference by drawing attention to global events. The All India Women's Movement is not an isolated movement. It is part of a great world movement. We are seeing with what heroism and strength of conviction our comrades, the women in China, Russia, Britain, and America, are facing the cruel vicissitudes of fortune. In all likelihood, we may have to face a similar fate, she noted. Now the time has come when we are confronted with problems that are not limited to the exclusive spheres of the woman or the man alone. They belong to the common humanity and demand a solution. Perhaps a perfect solution will never be possible in the sphere of human activities, limited as the human being is in his intellectual and physical capabilities. But nevertheless, a solution of the problems is an imperative need, if a belief in a better future is to be maintained. This conception is not utopian. It is practicable. It is an effort, a great and worthy effort. Disarmament, greater peace, a more sensible economic rehabilitation, and a better and more equitable distribution of the world's natural resources, a more human view of science, education, and art are all factors in that effort. Nan's keynote address, delivered shortly thereafter, echoed many of these sentiments. She, too, drew connections to women around the world and to organizations fighting for interrelated causes. The great forces arising in the world today, she said, will ultimately help shape the new world the new world which will come into being after the war. It is in planning for a new world order that women should take their share. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, a partner organization with the AIWC, has declared itself in favor of a world order based on a new attitude of man to man and nation to nation, with a realization of interdependence and a renunciation of exploitation and profiteering. But declarations to be effective must be implemented by action. Nan continued, we must decide whether we shall ally ourselves to the forces of life or those of death. Shall we raise our united voice in favor of a brave new world where human life and human liberty receive the respect which is their due, where progress and security are within the grasp of each individual? The future, not for women only, but for humanity as well, is what the women of India make of it. Today, woman faces the world as an individual for the first time. Her problems are the problems of society. And while fighting for those legal, civic, and economic rights which are still denied to us, let us not forget that the whole question of rights for women is closely linked to the social question, which, in its turn, is part of the larger political question. Nan mildly chastised the delegates for trying to take on too many tasks at once. As a result, they had wasted too much time passing resolutions to no meaningful effect. Nan called on them to tackle one problem collectively over the coming year: illiteracy, she suggested. A mass drive started by the conference would instantly invoke a response from other progressive groups and would help us to establish closer contacts with the villages and with the workers in the fields and factories. By way of ending, she first praised efforts to codify the Hindu law of succession, which sought to address deficiencies in the way women inherited property. She noted that the codification of the whole of Hindu law was urgently required, based on the equality of status between man and woman. Then she closed by appealing to her friends to remove the hatred and suspicion which have crept into our midst. India belongs to all of us, she reminded them. Her greatness is the result of that culture to which each sect and religion have contributed. Her past glory, as well as her present fallen condition, are the handiwork of her children. Some of the work we have done may have value, but if we can contribute even a small measure to the unity of India, we shall not have lived in vain. Now, before I close, a special treat.
In our country, we are specially hampered by lack of education, and one of the most important tasks which face us.
That's Nantara's voice.
Today,
That's
our people. Toward this end, our government is working, and schemes for free and compulsory primary education on the one hand, and adult literacy on the
Mother's
other,
voice.
are materializing with a degree of rapidity which we had hardly thought possible
Vijay
a
Lakshmi
few years
Pandit.
ago. There is much, however, to be done. I would not like you to imagine that we had accomplished anything but a small fraction of what looms ahead. But we are confident that our determination to succeed will help us forward at an ever-increasing pace. Time is against us. We have lived too long in the 18th century and must run if we are to catch up with the 20th. Without scientific techniques and industrial advancement, it is not possible to raise the living standards of a people. If standards of living are low, unrest and revolt must inevitably follow, which in turn may reignite the spark of war which still lies
Gita
smoldering.
Sehgal,
In order to prevent it from being rekindled, we must remove the causes which hasten wars: poverty, want, discrimination, colonial rule. These are among the basic reasons of war and conflict. We must direct our efforts toward the ending of colonial rule where it still exists, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, through abolition of all forms of discrimination and by the granting of equality of opportunity to all men and women, regardless of race and religion. There is much work and hard work to be done. Throughout the years, war has been described as a great adventure and death on the battlefield as the highest form of national service. It is my view that the adventure of living is far more noble, more exciting than that of dying, and the highest form of service to one's nation or to the world is to live for humanity and to serve it according